Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can't see your video though.
There, I just turned it on.
Oh, hi.
Oh my gosh, cute puppy!
Yeah, just one little one. She was scratching at the. She wanted to be picked up, so didn't want
Oh,
her to be a distraction later.
awesome.
So this is gonna be fun.
Yes, I have to thank you so much. Um, just the chance to talk to you means the world to me because of
Oh,
what Eric has done for my clients. And I'm not going to cry, but
go ahead. I cry so easily. We'll
I
cry together.
do too. But he's really helped my clients drop fear
Oh, that's
and
good.
move through the feelings of being near suicide.
Yeah,
So I
that's good.
can't thank you enough for the way that you continue to share him. It means the world. And, it was never my intent to directly bring him through in readings, but after I read his book, I'll never forget the first reading where he just popped up and was sitting there and was like, tell her not to worry about breast cancer. And
Cool.
so it was just like, oh, okay. Just a whole new concept to me.
You're just a Budinsky.
Yes.
He is. He does. He just horns in on people's sessions all the time.
That's awesome. He does. And it's funny because he's really teaching me to loosen up.
That's good.
Oh, yeah. So I can't thank you enough.
Sure. I'm so glad to be able to talk to you. So
Uh,
is our little guy there?
yeah, I can definitely feel him. And I just wrote something down because I was hearing him. I've been having dreams. He's been coming through all week in my dreams, which was very fascinating. Last night, I was in a park with him, and
Yeah.
there was 8 of him,
Oh.
but it was all different phases of his life. Like over
Gosh, I
here,
can only handle one. Oh my God. I'm kidding.
like one phase, he looked like he was maybe 10. Another phase, it looked like maybe he was 15. His hair was different.
Mm-hmm.
It was very cool. So,
Awesome.
so yeah,
And he looks
I
so different in every age. I swear to God, he looks like a different person in almost every picture. It's weird.
he
So,
did.
yeah.
He did, and his hair was different too.
Yeah, uh-huh.
So it was very, very interesting. But the first thing I wrote down, anyways, I just was sitting here waiting for you to call, and I just heard him say, "Where do you want to go from here?" So I'm not sure what that means, but I'm just gonna listen and pass it
Okay.
along. I
Well,
don't
I'm
know.
going to ask him some questions,
Okay,
just like session questions.
okay,
And we'll do this for about 30 minutes. I got to go
okay.
get my passport renewed. But anyway, Eric, what I want you to do, if you don't mind, is tell us a little bit about the loss of power. So many of us lose our power. Maybe we get demoted in a job. Maybe we lose our power in a relationship. Maybe we lose our power physically. There's all sorts of ways to lose power. Can you teach us about that?
Yeah, his energy is very strong. He says power is connected with ego, and when we let power choose our focus or be our driving factor, he says that's because you're standing in an ego centered place. He asks, like he says, you should step away from that and not be so fascinated or ruled by power, because he says power and the want of it, first of all, he says it comes from ego, but it also creates a separation from love. And he keeps repeating the quote. I'm sure you've heard this. And he keeps repeating it, and he's flashing a peace sign.
Mm-hmm.
Let me listen to him again. He says, when the power of love overrules the love of power, he says, then you're onto something.
Ah, that makes sense.
He goes like this. He says, so yeah, don't let it be ego-based, wanting that power. He says, and sometimes humans are so, he says, it's second nature. They don't even realize how much it happens, but they're so, it's a control thing too. When you lose power, you lose that sense of control. He says, why the hell do you want to try to control anyways? Because the more you have to control, the more stress you're going to have.
That's true. So control is overrated, I guess, huh?
He says very. Because, again, the more you want to and try to control, the more things are going to feel like they're out of your touch, he says. He says letting go of the need or the desire to control is what humans really struggle with. And he says in so many aspects, it can be from something as small as raising a garden, and it's out of your control whether or not it does well, to how you interact with society, and people aren't behaving like you would like them to. It's out of your control. And he says, fuck that. It's out of your control anyway, so just leave it alone.
Yeah, that's true. Why battle something we can't win against?
He just totally just said, hi, Mom, how are you? He just
hi.
said, how you are.
Oh, my God, you know what? I didn't say hi to you. That's right. We just went right into the questions. I'm sorry, sweetie. How are you doing?
He's like, I'm good. I'm always good. I want to know how you are.
I'm doing good.
He's getting really soft, which I say sometimes in my readings, like, when he softens his energy, to me, I understand he's trying to be very sincere. So he's just softening, and he's really, how are you? How are you doing? How are things? He's just really digging into you.
Digging in. No, I'm fine. I wish I didn't have to go to a government office today. I just can't stand the lines and stuff. But otherwise, everything's fine. Can you see him in your mind's eye, or?
I can.
What's he wearing? What does he look like today?
He has jeans on, and he usually always has like a lighter wash jeans on. And each time I've seen him, they've always been tattered. But today, it's like he dressed nicer. He still has jeans on, but they're nice jeans. They're not dirty or tattered. And he has his hands folded together in his lap. So he's in a position which I would call like a waiting. Like he just wants to wait for you to ask questions.
Okay.
He has on a white t-shirt, but I don't see anything on the front.
Okay.
I don't see anything on the front. I see him like from as if I were sitting to his right.
Okay. So, Erik, what do you think about her? What do you think about Kim? You like working with her?
He went, huh? He says she has a lot to learn. He says, he's laughing at me. He says she needs to loosen up because of, he's getting me used to cussing, and I've gone onto his blog and read about that, what he thinks about that, but, you know, he's opened me up a lot about that, but he says she's getting used to the cussing thing, and he wants me to share another way in which he's just trying to loosen me up. My business partner and I sat down and tried to do a session where we connected with Erik, and I don't follow the blog a lot, just because I'm busy and it can be overwhelming. But so I sat down with Ethan, my business partner, and we were talking to Erik, and I asked Erik to do or show something that I wouldn't know is about him or his personality that Ethan would know, because Ethan follows the blog very closely, and he flashed his privates. So
oh, no. Erik did?
Hi.
Oh, Erik.
It wasn't to be inappropriate. It wasn't to be perverse. It was to say loosen up.
Oh, yeah, sure. No.
I didn't take it that way. I didn't, you know, it wasn't funny or like awkward, nothing like that. It was more of his way of saying loosen up because it's just a body. It's just...
That's right. I can see him doing that.
And
probably just showing off.
He was, and he was just trying to kind of break the ice, I guess.
That's good.
But he also says to you, he's teaching me. I have learned a lot so far from him, just in connecting with his energy, but he also says, he's really gotten me to loosen up and to come from a more neutral standpoint than having any kind of, he says, having any kind of filter as far as my own beliefs. He's like, she's dropping that pretty easy to be more neutral.
Good.
In this role.
That must be so hard.
It is, but at the same time, when I'm able to achieve that with Erik's help, the readings are so much better. So at the same time, it's very easy to just drop that and just throw the information forward.
Yeah, he did that with Jamie too. Sometimes he'd stop and say, "Jamie, don't weed me, don't weed me." So he'd call her on it if she was using her filters.
Nice.
Anything else before we go on?
He's waiting for you.
Okay. All right, sweetie. Well, let's go. Still talk about power. Let's look at some examples. Say you have a woman who is a stay-at-home mom. They have a bunch of kids, and it costs more for her to put them in daycare than to go to work than stay at home. But, because of that, since the husband's the breadwinner, she feels like she doesn't have as much right to make some of the decisions regarding money and other factors, or at least regarding the finances. So she feels this loss of power.
It's so funny because before you even described like the family situation and all the kids and staying home, he's like, "Oh fuck, I know where she's going with that." He said, it's all about equality. He's putting himself in the wife's shoes, and he says, if you identify yourself with being lesser than, you will be. He says you have to see yourself as being equal to your partner no matter who does what and how much of it. He says it's all about equality. We are all equal. It doesn't matter. He says, I don't give a shit how much you make. I don't give a shit how much you're home. He says everybody's equal in the roles that they play. So really, there shouldn't be a sort of power struggle, he says. There shouldn't be... well, he's the breadwinner, so he gets all the say-so. Erik says that's really not how it should work. It should be more of an equality thing. He says, unfortunately, though, people these days only see their situations as such, as what you described.
They see money as power, too.
As soon as you said that, he said it's sick.
It is sick. So what should the woman do in that case? Just see herself as equal? What if the guy doesn't agree and feels like, hey, it's my money, I'm going to control the purse strings?
He's kind of walking around with his hand on his hip thinking, so I'm just listening. He's like, it's more, he's like, for a woman in that situation, she should really, first of all, treat herself. It's important that she treats herself as if she's equal to him, no matter how much he makes and no matter how much she doesn't. Okay. He said, because if she treats herself as equal, she will be seen as equal by her husband and anybody else around her. He says, but again, it's the same thing. He says if she treats herself as she doesn't have a say-so, then that's going to be accepted.
Okay. All right.
He just shakes his head. He's like, it's really unfair. He says, that's unfortunate.
It is. Any general last message for people who feel like they have no power? Or we could take another example, actually. Let's talk about somebody who's been demoted. I mean, that's a blow to a person's self-esteem. Wow, they just feel powerless. All of a sudden, the underlings are their boss.
He says, for someone that's demoted, and he actually is referring to, just for an example, he's using a military reference because I kind of connect with that pretty easily, being an Army wife. Okay. But he says, for someone who's been demoted, he says, obviously it's going to hurt. It's a blow to the ego. He says, and then he goes like this. He's like, but listen to what I just said. It's a blow to the ego. And then he says, most people don't have the capability in that situation because of what happened and the emotions attached to it. He says, but you have to step back and listen to the lesson in it. What happened and why? And did it happen because of ego in the first place? He says, sometimes, he says, it's a lesson in their path to get them to try to separate from ego, because if they're demoted, it's hard to still be real egotistical, he says, in that circumstance, he says. He says, don't take this the wrong way, but he says sometimes that's a really good thing when that happens to people, because it does make them take a step back and look and kind of lose some of that ego. But he really connects that with an ego thing.
Yeah. So it's a lesson. Most often it's a lesson for them.
He says, yeah, he gets real excited, and he says, yeah, it's a lesson to, because whether you like it or not, he says it really forces you to separate from your ego a little bit.
Okay. If you choose to, but a lot of people won't do that. Unfortunately, they'll let that valuable lesson go by the wayside.
He says most people react instead of think and process. He says most people just react, whether it's anger or sadness. But he says still in those situations and processing those emotions, you still shed some ego.
Okay. Oh, okay. And in the woman's case, is that mostly a lesson in learning the true nature of equality or something like that?
Do you mean like if a woman is demoted?
No, I should have said more. In the case of the woman that is the stay-at-home mom.
Okay. Yeah. He's agreeing with what you said, the equality. He says in that scenario that you told me, he says it's about how you see yourself, how you view yourself. He says you really have to realize that you are all equal. It doesn't matter what role you play, but there should be equality, and you should treat yourself equal to your partner no matter what your roles are.
Okay, so just basically it's about perspective in both of these cases. It seems like almost everything is.
He says, yeah, it really, perspective is the key, he says. I'm just listening. He says, I really don't want, and I'm just listening for him to finish his sentence.
Okay.
He says, I really don't want there to be any misconception here, misunderstanding. He says, no matter what scenario you're talking about, he's really on this equality thing. That must have been important to him because he wants to talk about equality.
Okay.
He says, it doesn't matter, obviously, again, he says, what role you play. Losing the power factor, he says, and the desire to have power over one another, he says, is a part of shedding the ego, but also it's kind of like peeling back an onion layer and then adding in a new layer, which he terms as love. And he said if more of us could come from a perspective of equality, no matter what role you're playing, still seeing yourself as equal to every other person. He says it's part of humility. Humility. Yeah. He says humility is very important. But remaining humble will keep you on that. He's like that equality frequency, wavelength, whatever you want to call it. But he also, this is cool. He says if you can keep humility, that will also keep you at a level where you're able to keep seeing others as equal, he says.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
So he says if you can, the more humility you can carry, he's like, which is important, the more humility you can carry, the more you'll be able to actually see other people as equal. And you won't come from that place of, I need to rule over or have power over or make all the decisions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He says, but nowadays, he says, can you believe it, Mom? And he shakes his head, and he's like, humility is so far from people's mindsets these days. People don't want to be humble. They don't want to...
There's insecurity.
Exactly. He says they don't want to be vulnerable.
Exactly. That's what I was just going to say.
He says, and then that's where power comes in, because if you adapt the power feeling and step into ego, then you don't have to feel vulnerable. You don't have to feel equal or humility. He says that's the complete disconnect. He says that disconnects people from nature, people from pets. It's he's like this sick power thing.
Yeah. Seems like it's gotten better when I think about the Middle Ages and all that. It seemed like power was much more important. Am I wrong?
No, he agrees, and he says he agrees that people are softening. They're making an effort, because he said people are realizing it's fatiguing to try to have power.
Oh,
he says it wears you out, and he says you don't belong there anyway. That's why it wears you out. He says, does it ever make you tired to love or to be humble? He says no, because that's where you're supposed to be. But he says power and ego make you so damn tired you can't stay there forever.
Yeah. It's almost like you're talking about two types of power. There are two types of power. One that's about control, and the other is our true power. We have power. Our innate power as a soul.
He just is shaking his head. He's not saying anything, but he's agreeing with you.
So we really do have power.
Yeah, and he's going like this. He said there definitely is, Mom. There's two different things. Power over yourself and power within yourself.
Ah.
He's laughing. He's like, it's very powerful. But then he says there's another bad power, he says, that it comes in where it makes you want to have control. And that's where people get off track, he says.
Okay.
He says, but power in yourself and of yourself is important, because he says you need to be able to control yourself. So that's the good control, he says. He says, but it really, he goes back to like the seed, and he says it's really about humility.
Humility is how you tap into your real power, right?
He says yes, and he says people need more of that.
Okay, anything else on that?
He says when you can really lose and shed, he's talking so fast. He's like, when, forget about what people think, what you look like, what you sound like, any of that. He says, shed all of that, forget all of that. Who cares what you look like, what you, your racial class, your financial class. When you can really shed all of that and look through and past all of that, that's where you find humility, he says, and that's where we all relate. That's where we're all one, he says.
That's where the connections occur.
He says exactly, and that's what we have to get back to. He says we're getting there. People are trying, he says people are wanting, there's a shift, and he says people are wanting to make just more connections. People are seeing their own damage, he says.
Good.
He says, and people are they're reaching out more. People are feeling isolated and realizing it. And he says people are trying to reverse that in the sense of humility. He said people are starting to try to acknowledge that again, because we've been so concerned with having power. Mm-hmm. He says it's hard for people to shed that, but they are. He says it's like this shift happening. They're trying.
That's good. What about one more question? What about the loss of looks? A lot of people, of course, just getting old. You don't look as as close to society's standards of beauty, or if you have getting a burn on your face and are disfigured. What can you tell people who have lost their looks? This is going to be just a little thing on loss here today, but how do you help them?
First thing that he does is his heart is pounding. He makes my heart pound. So he's just conveying sympathy and empathy for those people through that struggle. That's the first thing he wants to say, is that, you know, he feels for those people that go through that struggle because it's not easy. But he says that really boils down to self-love, because he says no matter what you look like, if you love yourself, people will see that. He says it's very hard because we do attach to what we look like.
Yeah.
We identify with what we look like. So if we become disfigured, he says, you lose a sense of your self-identity, but he says it's actually a lesson to teach you about yourself, to connect with yourself on a deeper level and learn self-love no matter what you look like, he says.
Ah, okay.
He says he was walking with a cane, and he's like, I really don't want that. He's like, screw that shit. I really don't. So he's just saying, you know, talking about and acknowledging the difficulty of growing old, because he says you lose your independence, and that also helps you identify yourself. When I can't rely on myself to do this and that, he says. So people, again, have to learn to self-love. And he goes like this. He's like, no matter what perspective you look at it, whether it's an elderly person losing the way they look, or someone that's been disfigured, he says, again, it's a lesson in self-love, and it's about their perspective, too.
Back to perspective. So what is my old age going to look like, besides getting horribly wrinkled and nasty looking? Am I going to be independent pretty much toward the end, or is it going to be like my mom, who really required a lot of care?
He gives me the word spitfire, and he said that no matter how you age, he said your voice is going to stay young. He just keeps repeating that.
Okay.
He says your voice will stay young.
I just don't want anybody having to change my diapers. Tell me they're not going to have to do that.
He makes me feel like they're not going to be able to hold you down. Like you just go, and you're going to keep going, he says.
Awesome. Well, you didn't have to worry about getting old, Erik, sadly.
He says, it's interesting because he says, I know that, Mom, but if I need to experience it, I can.
Yeah.
And so again, he shows me himself bent over, holding his back with a cane, a walking cane. And he says, if I need to experience that to understand that perspective, I can. He says, I can very easily. And he just is conveying compassion, again, for those people, because he says, think about it. If you have somebody who is so physically active, and he shows me a soldier again, so in shape and so active, and then they grow old and they lose that.
Yeah. He lost the power again.
Yeah, and he talks about even the mind, if they lose the ability to have clear thought process, he's conveying such empathy and sympathy, because he says that it's not easy to go through. It's very confusing, he says.
Yeah.
When your brain starts to work differently than it has for so long.
Mm.
He says it's exactly what you just said. It's a loss of power, self-power. He says it, and if you don't feel like you have power over yourself or control of your body, he says, then he goes, oh shit, now we're going to open up a whole other can of worms. But then he brings in the word hopeless. He says, then becomes this term hopelessness that people start to experience.
Mm.
He's like, that's a whole other can of worms we can get into, but
in a future time. Anything else? Because I want to also let Kim share a little bit about herself. Do you like to be called Kim or Kimberly?
Kim's fine.
Kim. Okay.
I have read Erik's book, and that's about it. So I don't even know if his father is still living or deceased, but he shouts out to his father.
Oh yeah, no, he's here, but yeah.
Okay, so he just gives a shout out to his father when he said anything else.
Tell me about your gift. I mean, your journey, just briefly, if you don't mind.
I have been seeing stuff and hearing stuff all my life. Didn't know what the hell was going on. And just a few years ago, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, really started to be able to understand it and process it. Well, then my husband got deployed, and I still wasn't understanding what happened. So before he got deployed, I just put it out there to the universe that I don't want to hear nothing. I don't want to see nothing. I can't handle this while he's gone.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A couple babies. And so then when he got home, I put it back out to the universe. Open the floodgates. I'm ready to help.
Good.
And so that's when it all started happening. And then just the last 3 years, I've read as much as I could get my hands on about the afterlife and metaphysics, quantum physics, really trying to understand what's happening. And so I just opened my own business where I can have a sacred place to do readings, Reiki, massage, incense and sage and jewelry, all that good stuff. But,
awesome.
People often ask, well, why did you open a shop? You can do readings from anywhere. Why have a business? And it's the bigger message. There's so much more than just the readings.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much more out there that I want people to see and understand. So I hope in some way that somehow I can help that happen. You know?
Well, it sounds like you already are.
Thank you. People are so afraid to just think for themselves and try to experience instead of do what they're taught. So hopefully we're going to break the mold.
Good. So, that's awesome. Well, this was fun. Does Erik pester you a lot? Pick on you, or?
I've been asking him. Yeah, he has been like picking on me. Like he'll cuss a lot in readings because he knows that at first I was uncomfortable with that, and he thinks it's hilarious.
Of course.
But now I'm getting used to it. And yesterday, this might be weird for you. Maybe you're past that. I don't know, but I've just been talking to him all week, asking him to stay close. And yesterday I was at the grocery store, and I looked down the drink aisle and was like, yeah, I don't need anything. But there was a woman bent over getting beer, and I didn't think twice about it. But then I turned, and as I was going down the next aisle, I heard, oh, titties! And I was like, oh, that's Erik, and I could just feel him. She was bending over, and she had a low touch on.
Oh my God, he'll never get tired of titties. Let me tell you.
But it was so funny because, like, in that moment, I was thinking to myself, I'm grocery shopping, but I'm like, Erik, stay by, let me know when you're here, and just like that, I heard him say that, and I was like, okay, he's here.
He's here. Well, at least he didn't shop for you. For Robert, he'll sling off the shelves Twizzlers and.
Oh, that's awesome.
Real sugary cereals and all that. They'll just fly off the shelves and land in his basket. And Robert's kind of a health food nut, so that was kind of funny.
That's funny. That's what Erik did with his book for me. The book was a gift, and I had it for months. And for whatever crazy reason, I was scared to read it. And I was home alone, and it was a very distinct sound, a book falling off a shelf. Mm-hmm. So I went to my bedroom, and his book was on the floor. So I picked it up, and I was like, okay, Erik, I'll get to you. And I put it back by my phone. The next day, the very same thing happened.
Oh.
Home alone. Book fell off the shelf, and I was like, okay, Erik, I get it. I still didn't start reading.
Mm-hmm.
That night, he came to me. It was just a dream, just white mist. He stepped forward and handed me his book.
Wow.
Okay, so the next day I read his book all in one day.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, I couldn't put it down. And, a few other things where, like, last night, it was crazy. I had a lucid dream about seeing him everywhere, and it was different phases of his life.
Right.
Then also, I was aware that I was dreaming, but I asked Erik, give me something to let me know that you're here. And that was the first time I saw a dragonfly.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and it was like showing everybody, this is how Erik makes himself known. You know, whether, I have no idea, but, and I think I told you about the frog thing too,
Yeah, that's cool.
I was thinking about him while I was mowing the grass, and there's this frog stuck to the side of my house. I'm like, okay. Well, then a couple nights later, when I was emailing you, he told me to ask you about the frog.
Yeah.
So,
And that was the frog that got stuck in my watering can nozzle, and it left. You know, it got out, thank God. And then it went back there again. So it just like its little home. So it's a little shock when you're trying to pour water and it doesn't come out, and all of a sudden this frog, frog jumps out.
I think that was Erik's way of saying, hi, Mom.
I think it is. Well, bye, Erik. I love you.
He's saying thank you.
Miss you.
He says, I miss you more. He just keeps doing this, like just saying thank you.
That's what he does. Well, thank you, Kim. This was amazing.
Yeah, I think we can connect again soon. I'm going to keep working with Erik to develop myself in any way I can. I told him, I said, make me your student, whatever I can do.
All right, well,